He didn't come on Friday. The piano was silent, and the silence sounded like my name. English version. On Rue Saint-Honor there is a piano bar that smells like red wine and second chances. Tourists say it's charming. Locals say it's old. I say it's where people go to forgive themselves for things they will do again next week. I used to sit at the back, beneath a crooked painting of the river, where the light barely reached and the waiters forgot to ask if I wanted water. From there I could see the whole room as if it were a stage. Set round tables, mirrored shelves, a velvet curtain the color of dried cherries. Every Friday the same music began like a ritual, a quiet prelude, a pause that flirted with silence, and then Julian entering, sleeves rolled, eyes softened by the kind of hope that ruins men like him. He played for an hour, sometimes two, and I pretended I didn't notice the way his melody bent when he found me in the shadows. I never clapped first. I never stayed last. I always left him with a look that meant everything and promised nothing. But tonight the lid of the piano stayed shut, reflecting the chandelier like a lake with no wind. The bar felt misarranged, as if someone had moved the furniture of my life while I wasn't looking. A different pianist filled the space with tidy chords that knew better than to ask for love. They were perfectly fine like polite weather. No rain, no sun, just temperature. The bartender Etienne poured my Merlot without asking. "Alone again, mademoiselle," he said. "Aren't we all?" I replied, and the line sounded like a coat I had worn too often. I told myself I didn't care. Men come and go, music fades and returns. I am the constant. That is the story I've sold to strangers in mirrors. It costs less than the truth. When Julian first played here, he was careful with sound the way some people are careful with fragile hearts. He left room for air, for listening, for a kind of tenderness that doesn't apologize. He never spoke to me after the sets, not at first. He only nodded, as if to say he understood the terms of my distance. Later he began to leave small things, a folded staff paper with a bar of melody, a matchbox with a date written inside, a rose, once left on a stool as though love were an instrument he could play in my absence. I took the souvenirs and offered him my finest currency. I am good at attention. It is my softest blade. Tonight, the door chimed and strangers walked in wearing rain and perfume. I waited for his shadow to lengthen through the aisle. For that slight hesitation he had before the first note as if asking permission from the night. But the night had nothing to give me. I drank slowly. People who drink quickly are trying to arrive somewhere. People who drink slowly are trying not to leave. I watched the mirror behind the bar, how it tripled the bottles and made a small, endless city of glass. In that city, I could almost see us. He playing, I pretending, the room believing. Etienne placed a coaster under my glass, a ritual he reserved for regulars and the broken. He called this afternoon, he said, low enough to pass for background noise. Said he needed time. Time for what? I asked. To stop, he said, or to learn how. I laughed, the practiced sound of a woman who has never let a laugh betray her. Men don't stop, I said. They pause. But the word pause hung in the air like a wrong note. I realized then that all the pauses in his music had been invitations. I had mistaken them for obedience. The substitute pianist finished early. The curtain looked heavier than usual, as if it had absorbed a weather report. I stayed longer than I should have, listening for footsteps that knew my name. The last table paid and left. Chairs turned to face their own legs. Etienne counted the cash drawer with the gentleness of someone tucking in a child. I walked to the piano. Up close, it smelled of varnish and last week's longing. On the music stand lay a single item, a slender black metronome, stopped at 60, as if a heart had chosen the safest beat and died there. I touched the wood. It was cool, like the kind of truth you can only hold for a second. There was a mark on the lacquer where a ring might have struck it, perhaps his, perhaps someone else's. I wanted to wind the metronome, to make the room remember the possibility of time, but I didn't. I have always distrusted anything that asks to be set in motion. Outside, Paris exhaled mist. The street looked rinsed, as if the city had tried to clean itself for a better story. I stood under the awning and watched umbrellas pass like disciplined birds. A couple laughed. A bicycle bell insisted. Somewhere, a siren announced a small grief to people who would not hear it. I thought of the first night he noticed me, how the melody swerved, how the air agreed with our mistake. I thought of the last roses he brought, heavy with a perfume that belonged to endings. I had said nothing then, the most articulate weapon I own. A taxi pulled up. I didn't raise my hand. I waited, as if waiting were a profession for which I had finally gained credentials. When I turned to leave, there it was, harmless, ridiculous, undeniably single red petal at the edge of the sidewalk, rain dark and shining. It might have been from anyone's bouquet. It might have been a trick of color. It might have been the city offering me a metaphor out of pity. I stepped over it. Mercy is not my talent. At the corner, a busker plucked at a guitar with the patience of a prayer. His case was open, the felt inside shining with small coins and lazy wishes. He began a tune that almost recognized me. I paused, and for a breath, I imagined Julian's hands where the guitar was, and the piano where the street was, and the bar where my life should have been. Then the busker changed keys, and the moment fell apart without manners. Back at my apartment, the night smelled of rain and wreckage. I poured the last inch of Merlot and stood by the window. In the glass, I could see my face and, for once, the cost of it. Cities are generous with absolution, but windows are not. He didn't come on Friday. The piano was silent, and the silence sounded like my name. I told myself I would sleep. I told myself I wouldn't check my phone. I told myself many beautiful lies, each with excellent posture. Somewhere below, a door closed the way a song ends when someone decides it should. I finished the wine. I left the light on. I practiced the oldest art I know, appearing unhurt. They say red wine remembers better than people do. I believe it because every sip still tastes like him. I met Julian on a Thursday that felt like an afterthought of spring. The rain had stopped but hadn't apologized. I was late, I was always late, and he was sitting by the gallery's piano, coaxing the instrument into tune as if it were a child that had forgotten how to speak. "You're blocking the doorway," I said, not because he was, but because I needed him to notice me. He looked up, half smiled. "Then perhaps fate wanted me to stop you." That was his style, gentle words with nowhere to hide. I laughed, the way people do when they feel cornered by sincerity. Later that afternoon, he played a piece I didn't recognize. It was clumsy, uncertain, but there was something in the hesitation that made it beautiful, as if every pause were a confession. I stood there longer than I should have, pretending to study a painting of waves breaking on rocks. "Do you like it?" he asked. "The painting?" "No," he said. "The silence between us." I didn't answer. I never do when I feel something too clearly. That night, I dreamed of music, not his, but mine. The sound of heels on wet pavement, of a door that always closes too softly, of voices that stay long after they've gone. A week later, I went to the bar on purpose. He was there, of course, like a song that waits to be finished. I sat in the corner again, ordered the same Merlot, and told myself I wasn't curious. He saw me, and the room tilted. His hands trembled once on the keys, a barely visible mistake that sounded like my name. After the set, he came over, still carrying his nervous breathing. "You look like someone who doesn't believe in happy endings." "I prefer truthful ones." "Then we're already doomed," he said softly. He walked me out under the drizzle. Paris was a blur of headlights and promises. I asked why he played for strangers. "Because music listens back," he said. "I wish people did." That sentence landed somewhere behind my ribs, and never left. We began meeting without meaning to. An afternoon coffee, a shared umbrella, a silence that lasted too long to ignore. He spoke of hope like it was a language. I spoke of detachment like it was a virtue. Yet every time he played, I listened closer than before, like a thief learning the sound of her own guilt. Regret always starts beautifully. That's how it fools you into believing it's love. Love doesn't break you all at once. It chips you, quietly, the way frost eats through a window pane. The night she left, the piano still carried her perfume. He didn't close the lid, he couldn't. The air between the keys still breathed her name. Julian stayed after hours, sitting alone under the dim light of the bar. The glasses had been washed, the chairs turned upside down, and the street outside hummed with a loneliness only Paris understood. He placed his fingers on the keys and pressed, not to play, but to remember. Each note felt like a question that had forgotten its words. Etienne, wiping the counter, said softly, "She won't come back tonight." Julien smiled without lifting his head. "I know. But music doesn't stop just because someone leaves." Etienne didn't answer. He dimmed the lamps one by one, leaving only the piano light, that fragile halo meant for people who still believe in something. Julien began to play, quietly, a melody he hadn't shared with anyone. It was simple, almost hesitant, the sound of rain deciding whether to fall. He remembered her laughter, sharp as glass, and just as clear. He remembered the way she held her wine glass by the stem, never by the bowl, as if afraid of warming what she didn't intend to drink. She had taught him something he wished he didn't learn, that love could exist without kindness. When the clock struck 2, he stopped. The silence rang louder than any applause. He closed the piano at last, his hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "Enough." But he came back the next night, and the night after that, and every night that week. Sometimes he played for a room half empty, sometimes for no one at all. But always, before the first note, he turned toward the corner table, her table, just to make sure the absence was still honest. On the 5th night, a woman approached him after the show. She smiled kindly, asked if he took song requests. "Only if it's about forgetting," he said. "Then play something to help me remember," she replied. He played, but all the music still belonged to her. Every chord betrayed him. Every pause carried her voice. When the woman left, she slipped a tip into the jar and whispered, "Whoever she was, she must have been unforgettable." Julien didn't answer. He simply watched the door close, the way she once did. Later that night, Etienne found him writing something on the back of a napkin. "A new song?" "No," Julien said, smiling faintly. "An ending?" The napkin read only 4 words. She never listened back. He folded it carefully and placed it inside the piano, between middle C and the first G, the same place where her name used to live. Julien began leaving small tokens again, a napkin with music bars, a pressed daisy between receipts, little gestures that said "I'm still here" when words could not. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I could still leave before it mattered. But cruelty isn't in what we do. It's in what we allow. And I allowed everything. One evening he brought a record to my flat, an old vinyl of Chopin's Nocturne. "You never listen to music when you're alone," he said. "Because silence doesn't argue back," I replied. He smiled the way tired people smile, softly, as if afraid to wake their hope. Then he asked, "Do you ever get lonely?" I lied. "Never." He didn't challenge it. He just poured the wine and said, "Then drink for me. I get lonely enough for 2. We drank until the city blurred. He told me about his childhood in Lyon, his mother's garden, how he learned to play by ear, because sheet music felt too obedient. I told him nothing real, only stories rehearsed for men like him, beautiful, disposable, easy to remember wrong. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "You don't have to pretend you're made of glass." "Glass doesn't pretend," I said. "It just breaks quietly." He kissed me then, not to claim, not to conquer, but to understand. And that was worse. Afterward, he fell asleep on my sofa. The record spun to the end, scratching softly like a secret refusing to die. I sat beside him, watching his breathing draw tiny clouds into the air. I could have loved him, I think. But I was addicted to almost. When he woke, he found the room empty. I had left before dawn, leaving behind nothing but the smell of Merlot and my unfinished cigarette. That night, he played at the bar again. The melody had changed. It carried weight now, like a body learning to limp. Etienne told me later he asked if I'd been there. "No," he said, answering himself. "I'd know if she was." He was right. He would have known the same way silence knows who broke it first. Cruelty, I learned, is a discipline. And I was its best student. Rain in Paris doesn't fall. It lingers. It stays on rooftops, window panes, and people who don't know how to leave. That evening, I walked without purpose, following the sound of street lamps flickering in the fog. The air tasted like rain and cigarette smoke, Two things that always reminded me of him. It had been months since I last stepped into that piano bar. I told myself I had outgrown it. But loneliness has a strange compass. It always leads you back to your ruins. The sign was dimmer now. The same bartender, Etienne, looked older, slower, as if he had been aging in real time while I hid from it. "It's been a while," he said. "Has it?" I asked, pretending not to remember. "He used to ask about you." I froze. The air grew heavier, dense with unsaid names. "And now?" Etienne sighed. "Now he plays somewhere else. Or maybe he doesn't play at all." I sat at the same table, my table, and ordered the same Merlot. The glass trembled slightly when it touched the wood. I wasn't sure if it was my hand or the past shaking. The pianist on stage began to play a tune I didn't recognize until halfway through. A note bent, delicate and broken, just the way Julian used to do when he was searching for me with his eyes. I looked up so fast, the room blurred. But it wasn't him. Just a boy too young to know what heartbreak costs, too new to understand how music can sound like a person. Still, my body betrayed me. My heart matched the tempo, my breath followed the rhythm. When he finished, I clapped once, not for the boy, but for the ghost. Etienne placed an ashtray in front of me. "You don't smoke," he said. "I used to," I replied, "before I met someone who hated the smell." He nodded slowly. "Funny, he quit for the same reason." The rain grew louder outside, the kind that fills silence without asking permission. I watched drops slide down the window, merging and separating like choices we never made. Somewhere between them, I saw us. Him in his old black coat, me in my arrogance. The girl who wanted control, and the man who mistook patience for love. My glass was empty before I realized I'd been drinking. I asked for another. "The same?" Etienne asked. "Always," I said. He poured, and for a moment, the red looked darker than usual, as if the wine had been listening. Outside, a bus passed. Its lights flickered through the rain, and I thought I heard music again, faint, fading, like forgiveness I hadn't earned. I wanted to believe it was him, that he was somewhere under the same rain, still playing, still waiting. But then I remembered. He was the one who finally learned to stop, and I was still rehearsing the art of pretending I never cared. Some memories don't belong to time. They live in sound. In rain against glass. In footsteps across wooden floors. In the sigh you try to hide when someone almost stays. The night by the river began with thunder and the smell of damp leaves. He had walked me home after a concert, umbrella in one hand, his silence in the other. "You live here?" he asked, looking up at the narrow balcony where ivy curled around the railing. "Sometimes," I said, "when I can stand myself." He smiled, the kind of smile that forgives too. I offered him wine, the same Merlot we always shared. He took it like confession. The river below shimmered with city light, its surface trembling under the rain. "You can stay until it stops," I said. "Rain never really stops," he answered. "It just changes places." He sat by the piano I never played. "It's out of tune," I said quickly, embarrassed. "So am I," he murmured. "Let's be out of tune together." He played softly, hesitant, searching, tender. The sound wandered through the room like someone lost but unwilling to be found. I watched his hands move, remembering every note he'd ever left inside me. The glass in my hand sweated. My pulse tried to hide. "Julian," I said quietly. He stopped, looked at me, waiting for a sentence that never came. What I wanted to say was, "Don't go." What I said instead was, "You should finish the song." He nodded, slow, sad, and played a final phrase that sounded like surrender. When it ended, neither of us moved. The only sound left was the rain, steady and knowing. He reached for his coat. "It's late," he said. "You can stay," I replied. He hesitated, then smiled. That same, quiet, impossible smile. The kind of smile that closes a chapter without turning the page. "You don't mean that," he said. "Maybe I don't," I admitted. "But I wish I did." He looked at me a moment longer, as if memorizing the shape of something already gone, then left softly, like music fading into the river's sound. I stood at the balcony for hours, watching rain hit the water, each drop becoming part of something larger, something that forgets itself to belong. That was the night I almost loved him. And almost, I've learned, is the most faithful kind of regret. Silence, I discovered, has a rhythm. You can almost dance to it if you've lost enough. After Julian left, my days became immaculate, polished, clean of accidents. I woke at the same hour, drank the same coffee, opened the same window that refused to face the river. The piano in the corner became a piece of furniture again. Dust settled over it like mercy I didn't deserve. Sometimes, I thought I heard music from the street below. A melody almost familiar, then gone before I could name it. In the beginning, I still expected him to return. I kept wine in the cabinet, 2 glasses side by side, as if preparation could substitute for hope. Days turned to weeks. The river changed moods, sometimes calm, sometimes swollen with rain, always indifferent. I walked by it every evening, watching strangers lean over the railings, lovers kissing in the reflection of a city that forgives everything except timing. Once, I saw a street pianist near Pont-Neuf. His hair was too long, his hands too thin, but the way he touched the keys, gentle, deliberate, reminded me so much of Julian, that I almost said his name out loud. The song was wrong though. It was too hopeful. Julian never played hope. He played truth. I dropped a coin into the pianist's hat and walked away. The sound of metal against fabric was sharper than I expected. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished. Nights stretched longer. I learned to fill them with everything that wasn't him. Cheap wine, slower jazz, strangers' laughter through the wall. It worked, for a while, until the silence came back. Not the kind that waits, but the kind that remembers. One night, unable to sleep, I lifted the piano lid. The keys looked pale, like bones left too long in the cold. I pressed middle C, a small, honest sound. Then another note, and another, until the room began to breathe again. I wasn't playing his song. I wasn't playing any song at all. Just keeping the silence company. When I stopped, the world seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the river moved on. It always does. Maybe that's all music is. The memory of movement, and the grace to stop pretending it lasts forever. They say people write letters to the dead to heal. I wrote mine to the living, to the man I buried with my silence. Letter 1. I don't know where you are. Paris feels smaller without you, like a song that forgot its bridge. I saw a man carrying roses today. He held them wrong, by the blooms instead of the stems. You once told me the same thing hurts differently depending on how you hold it. I think I understand that now. Letter 2. Do you still play? I tell myself you don't, that the world has finally quieted for you. But sometimes, in the early hours, when the city hasn't yet woken, I swear I hear music. It comes from nowhere, disappears too soon. Like forgiveness changing its mind. Letter 3. I lied to you more times than I can count. The worst one wasn't when I said I didn't love you. It was when I said I couldn't. Because I could, I just didn't want to. There's a difference between being incapable and being unwilling. One deserves sympathy, the other deserves silence. You gave me both. Letter 4. I still keep the metronome you left behind. It stopped at 60, your favorite tempo. I used to think you left it as a message. Some metaphor I was too cruel to decode. Now I think you just forgot it. The way people forget anything that doesn't hurt enough. Letter 5. Someone asked me recently what I missed most about you. I said, the part of me that existed when you looked at me. Because that woman, the one you believed could be kind, only lived in your eyes. When you left, she went with you. Letter 6. If you ever come back, don't bring roses. Don't bring music. Don't even bring forgiveness. Just ask me if I'm still pretending. I'll tell you the truth, for once. Letter 7. I'll never send these. Because if you read them, they'd turn into excuses. And you, my dear, have already learned to live without them. That's what makes you braver than I ever was. Yours. The woman who mistook power for love, and silence for strength. They say time heals. But time doesn't heal, it edits. It takes out the noise, softens the colors, and leaves you with a quieter version of what you can no longer fix. It had been 3 years since I last saw him. Long enough for seasons to lose count. Short enough for my pulse to still remember his name. The gallery had changed. New owners, new art. The same smell of old frames and fresh beginnings. I was invited to an exhibition. Echoes of Light. I went because I was bored. Or maybe because I wasn't. When I entered, I heard it first. A piano from the back room. Not loud, not even confident. Just steady. Like breathing learned all over again. I followed the sound. Each note brushing against the part of me that still bled politely. And there he was. Julian, older, quieter, more real. His hair shorter, his eyes calmer, as if someone had taken away his hunger and left peace in its place. He was playing something unfamiliar, a melody that didn't belong to our story. It was clean, complete, a song that didn't ache. He noticed me before I could decide whether to leave. "You came," he said softly. "I didn't plan to. You never did." His voice carried no resentment, only fact. Like a weather report for feelings long expired. "You still play," I said, more to fill the air than to ask. "Only for myself now." He smiled, and I felt something collapse quietly, without sound. We stood in that gentle awkwardness of people who once shared everything and now owe each other nothing. "I heard you left the bar," I said. "I left the waiting," he replied. The words landed softly, like petals falling where applause used to be. I wanted to tell him about the letters, the sleepless nights, the version of me that learned too late how to be kind. But I didn't. Some truths come too late for forgiveness, and too early for peace. "You look happy," I said. "I am," he answered, and for the first time, I believed him. There was a woman nearby. She touched his shoulder lightly, the kind of touch that belongs not to possession, but to understanding. He turned to her, smiled, then looked back at me one last time. "Take care," he said. "You too." And that was it. No music, no rain, no goodbye kiss. Just two people finally fluent in silence. I walked out into the street, where spring was trying to pretend it was still winter. The air was soft, and for the first time in years, I realized the ache was gone. Not because it healed, but because it had nowhere left to live. I once read that the hardest part of closure isn't letting go. It's realizing there was never anything to hold. He called me on a Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't deserve a name. "Would you like to have a drink?" he asked. I said yes, even though the word tasted like confession. We met at a small cafe near the river, the same river that had witnessed both our arrogance and our apologies. The evening light was gold, soft and unassuming, as if the world had chosen to forgive us without asking why. He arrived first. No piano, no audience, just him. A man who used to believe silence was music. "You haven't changed," he said. "That's not a compliment," I smiled. "No," he said, "it's not." We ordered wine, red, of course. The same we used to share when we still mistook conversation for intimacy. The first sip burned like memory. "How have you been?" I asked. "Peaceful," he said. "Finally, peaceful," I repeated, as if testing a word I'd never owned. "And you?" "Still rehearsing my lines?" I said. But the audience stopped listening. He smiled faintly. "You were never meant to perform. You were meant to feel." "Feeling," I said, "was always your department." We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because we finally could. He looked out at the water. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "All of it. The music, the silence, the not staying." I took a moment before answering. "Regret is just memory that refuses to fade. I've learned to dim it." He nodded, his gaze gentle but distant. "I used to think I'd wait forever. Turns out forever ends quietly. Maybe that's what makes it bearable." A pause stretched between us. Wide, soft, final. "Do you love someone now?" I asked, hating myself for needing to know. "Yes," he said. "But not like before. Better, kinder." I laughed quietly. "That's better." He raised his glass. "To kindness, then." I clinked mine against his. "To everything we weren't." The glasses met with a sound so delicate, it could have been mistaken for forgiveness. We drank, and for the first time, I didn't taste loss. Just wine. And a man I once loved finally belonging to peace. When he stood to leave, he looked at me one last time. You know, he said softly, you were right about one thing. What's that? Love doesn't last. He smiled, gentle, not bitter. But the way you taught me silence that stayed. He walked away before I could reply. I finished my glass slowly. The wine was warm now, heavy with something like closure. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the egg had finally found its shape. And some shapes are too complete to break again. The bar had changed names again. I wasn't supposed to be there, and yet I was. They said a pianist would play tonight. An older man with kind eyes, a quiet presence. I didn't ask who. Some things are better discovered by accident. The lights were dim, the kind of gold that makes dust look like constellations. The room smelled of oak and winter, and when he sat at the piano, I forgot how to breathe. Julian. He looked the same and not the same, like time had erased only the parts that used to ache. He didn't see me, or maybe he did, and chose kindness over recognition. The first note came like a sigh, not of sadness, but of acceptance. He played slowly, as if translating silence into sound. The melody had no beginning, no end, only movement, like the tide of something that used to matter. I closed my eyes. Every chord was a conversation we never finished. Every pause, a breath we forgot to take together. Around us, the audience was still. Even the air seemed to listen. At one point, he looked toward the corner, my corner, and smiled. Not at me, but at memory itself. That smile broke me more gently than any goodbye ever could. The final note lingered, trembling in the air, refusing to die until it became part of the quiet. When the applause came, he only nodded once. Humble, distant, whole. I didn't stay to speak. I couldn't. Outside, the night was kind. I heard him again when the wind brushed against the Seine. The faint echo of a song without a name. It wasn't a love song. It was something rarer. Forgiveness without an audience. And maybe that's what all music becomes. When love finally learns to let go. Years later, I returned to the city where everything ended. Or maybe where everything had simply paused long enough for me to grow around the silence. Paris hadn't changed much. The river still moved, like time pretending to be kind. The cafe still smelled of burnt sugar and rain. Only I had changed. Softer now. Slower. Like the echo of a song that no longer asks to be remembered. The bar was gone. A bookstore stood in its place. Quiet and golden. The kind of place that worships what's already been said. I walked in anyway. The same spot where he once played was now filled with shelves. Music scores, poetry, silence bound in paper. I ran my hand along the spines, the way I once touched his shoulder, careful, unwilling to wake something that had finally slept. The owner looked up from the counter. Looking for something in particular? I smiled. No, just something that doesn't end. He laughed softly. Then you're in the wrong section. I bought a book anyway, a collection of Rilke's letters, and sat by the window with a cup of wine. Outside, it began to rain. I thought of Julian, not the way he looked, but the way he listened. How he used to leave space between his words, as if he already knew silence would outlive us both. I lifted the glass, read again, always read, and whispered, to the sound of nothing. The first sip was calm, almost sweet, and for the first time, the quiet didn't ache. It simply was. I stayed there until the light dimmed, watching the rain draw lines on the glass, every drop a tiny unfinished sentence. Somewhere, far away, a piano began to play. I couldn't tell if it was real, or if the memory had learned a new way to return. Either way, I closed my eyes and let it play. Because maybe that's what love truly becomes. Not the fire, not the pain, not even the person, but the quiet that remains. After the music stops,